This is Meyers Manx. Today's question: are VW Beetles all the same? Can you take parts off of one and put it on the other? Not all the time. There are quite a few changes over the years, some of them major. These are the facts of the matter. Let's talk about I.R.S, independent rear suspension. That means if one of the rear wheels moves up or down, it doesn't affect the other side. What year Beetles had I.R.S suspension? All of them. They're either a single joint axle or a double joint axle. It's one or the other, but they're both I.R.S. When you mention you have an I.R.S suspension on your Beetle or Buggy or whatever to somebody from England or Germany, they'll look at you and say, they'll look puzzled, because all of them had I.R.S suspension. The way they determine the difference between the two suspension systems is either it has a single joint axle or a double joint axle. The older ones have a single joint. I don't know how Americans started to use the term I.R.S, but it's inaccurate. Another thing you need to know, 1966, they started ball joints. Now the floor pans are different from 66 on and newer. The horizontal tubes on the front axle, on ball joints, they're 6 inches apart center to center. On link pin kingpin axles, they're like 5 inches apart. So you can't switch from one to the other. You'd have to change the entire pan assembly or that front nose section. And that's a lot more work than most of you would want to do. This is the front axle assembly on my 71 Meyers Manx. Has a ball joint front end. And as you can see, the distance from the top tube to the bottom tube, center to center, is 6 inches. On the link pin front end, it's somewhere around 5, an inch difference. And like I said, you can't switch them back and forth. Either you have a ball joint pan assembly or a link pin pan assembly. Some changes in 1967 where they went to a 12-volt system, but it still had the generator, and it also had a bigger diameter flywheel and clutch assembly. Most of you are familiar with the 12-volt system being different. Also in 1967, the rear axle was wider, 1.22 inches per side. What that means is on a 67 and newer, you can buy a wheel for the rear that has 5.5 inches of back spacing and still have plenty of room. But on the 66 and earlier single joint axles, you can't go more than 4.5 back spacing. I'll show you the difference. Here's my single joint axle on my 1967 Meyers Manx. When I said that the 67s were wider, you can tell by measuring from the brake drum to the spring plate. It's about 3 3/8 inches. When you look at the 67 and newer axle end, it's 4 5/8. That difference is made up with different axles because the 66 and older have a 26 and 11/16 inch axle, and the 67 and newers have a 27 and 3/4 long axle. You can switch these over back and forth between the years if you need to bring your tires and wheels in a little further or out a little further. You just have to buy a different set of axle tubes and axles. Another thing they changed in '67 is they went to a dual circuit master cylinder. These are the master cylinders I prefer to use because if you ever develop a leak in a single circuit system, once the fluid is gone, you have no brakes. But in a dual circuit system, if you lose fluid from the front or the rear, the opposite still works. You can still stop the vehicle. It's a lot safer. They were federally mandated in '67. All cars had to have them. Another thing, in 1968, the rear brake shoes are wider. They're 1.56 inches wide, where all the years before they were 1.19 wide. If you need a little bit better stopping capacity in the rear of your Beetle, if you can find a 68, 69 drum brake setup, for the rear, buy the backing plates and everything, and you can change over. Another thing for Dune Buggy owners is in 1971, the floor pans are 1/2 inch wider per side. It's like a total of 1 inch across the floor pan assembly. Which sounds like no big deal, but when you try to stick a Manx Dune Buggy body on it, your bolts that go through the body side rails are going to be out too far. You'll have room for the bolt, but probably not the washer to hold it down. I'll show you what I'm talking about there. So there you see, if those bolts were out another 1/2 inch, 13 millimeter, they would get real close to the body side rails. Another thing to remember, the original Meyers Manx body, until the Manx 2s come out, was designed to sit on a single joint axle frame, floor pan. Because where the battery box is and the spare tire well, the diagonal arms on the suspension will come up and hit the bottom of the box or the spare tire well. You can make them fit, but you have to be able to do some fancy fiberglass work to shorten those two areas. Maybe like take 2 inches out of the bottom of the spare tire well, make it flat on the bottom, and move the battery up about the same 2 inches, the battery box up about 2 inches, and make sure you get a battery short enough to fit in there. It's quite a bit of work, but you can do it if you have to. Well, that's about it. This is Milo Manx. And if you would be so kind to throw a couple dollars in the PayPal me link I have down in the comment box, it'd certainly be appreciated. One other thing, if you want more information about the changes of the Beetle over the years, go to a website called Rob and Dave's VW. It shows everything you'd ever want to know. I'll also throw a link in the description box. All right, later.